Welcome in. It's the Arrowhead Addict podcast, and we are ranking the 50 greatest Chiefs of all time. And now let's kick things off with one of my favorite Chiefs of all time. The reason I'm a Chiefs fan is because of this guy, and so I'm rocking his jersey today. Mr. Joe Montana, fellas, coming in at number 40. He's an interesting one on this list, right? Because he wasn't a Chief for a long time, but he's, in the eyes of many, one of the greatest Chiefs of all time. Of course, one of the greatest football players of all time. So let's go around the horn and see where everybody had Joe for him to land at number 40. And let's start with you, Sterling. Where'd you rank Joe?
I had Joe Montana right there at 37. And by the way, I thought that was a Kadarius Toney jersey. That's what I thought you were rocking today instead of Joe Montana. He was one of the hardest ones to rank. He's coming in at 37 on my list because the Joe Montana era was the best Chiefs era since the early dominant period of Kansas City. And then you go with who was the quarterback? Well, it was Joe Cool. He only played 2 years. 1 year he was a Pro Bowler. It was years 37 and 38 of his career. We're not talking about Joe Montana's prime. But again, those 25 games were 25 of the best games. And again, before this era of Chiefs football, some of the best in Chiefs history. So how do you judge the non-longevity, but the winning coupled with the force that Joe Montana was, right? The off the field, the badass, the Joe Montana, the Joe Cool. It was so hard for me, but I put him at 37. And again, it goes down to positional value as well, which I know Matt Connor is a huge fan of.
I am a huge fan of it. It's weird to me because you're right. I mean, that era was magic. I had him at 42, just to go across the board. Patrick, you had him 42. I had him 42. Adam Best had him ranked lowest of any of us, treasuring Montana more than any of us, even though Patrick's wearing the jersey. And when I saw that, I felt bad because it's like, did I betray Joe Montana? I ranked him worse than other guys that we care less about on the list, right? And at the same time, Cornell Powell has played more seasons for the Chiefs than Joe Montana did. I mean, there was something there for me that was like...
yeah, but not games though, Connor. Right. Come on.
Okay, look, but I'm saying number of seasons. And so I guess here's what I'm saying. I love Joe. I love what he brought. It cemented my fandom for me. I was already a fan, but it cemented it. And as like watching him was like, it was brilliant. It was brilliant. It was probably like young Bucks fans watching Tom Brady come to town and reinvigorate that franchise. And yet, it just wasn't long. And I don't want to like overly decorate it with patches and stars, bells and whistles when it was a 2-year stretch. That's what it was. And it's not like it didn't deliver a Super Bowl. So I want to be realistic and at the same time like nostalgic. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I want to hear from Adam because Adam had a Joe ranked 30th. And before you kick it to him, I think one thing that we should think about, too, is the impact that Joe had while he was here, his arrival, what it meant. The Chiefs had won one playoff game since Super Bowl IV before Joe Montana came to the team. And then they won 2 playoff games that year. Adam, why did you have Joe ranked at number 30?
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember this. And it was like we had trekked through the Sahara and we finally found water. That's what the arrival of Joe Montana felt like. And really, for the first time, I felt like they could win a Super Bowl. I really did. And I still think they could have. Joe thinks they could have. I think they could have. They got dangerously close. They ran into what was almost a dynasty in the Buffalo Bills. I mean, should kind of consider the Buffalo Bills a dynasty. Going to the Super Bowl 4 times in a row and losing is a more impressive run than a lot of Super Bowl champions. And then since then, until Mahomes came, I never believed we were going to win a Super Bowl. Not with Alex Smith, not with Trent Green. Sorry, love those guys, but I thought Joe had the goods to deliver that to Kansas City. It's also very hard to divorce ourselves from 49ers Joe Montana and Joe Cool and everything he's done. So this is a very hard exercise. And I found myself battling with impact, greatness, positional value, all those things that are on his side versus how short his tenure was in Kansas City. But I think his impact on and off the field, and again, off the field's kind of hard, but a lot of people became Chiefs fans because of Joe Montana.
He ushered in a new generation of Chiefs fans. I think, it was kind of like the Chiefs had stunk up to that point. Like they had a good team, but they didn't have the quarterbacks. But before that Marty Schottenheimer era, the Chiefs were bad for a long time. As we mentioned, one playoff win since Super Bowl IV. The arrival of Joe Montana was somewhat unique at the time in that, like, you had this sort of Midwestern team of former glory, but that was really kind of an afterthought in NFL circles. And then here comes Joe Cool to Kansas City. And not only Joe Montana, but then they bring along Marcus Allen as well. And the amount of national media attention that was on Joe Montana and on the Chiefs for like the first time in, I mean, the book on the Chiefs was, right, like they'll get to the playoffs and then they'll choke. And then Joe Montana comes, and it really just changed everything. And it actually set up like the spotlight being on the Chiefs and Montana. That game where he played in that first season in Kansas City, where they played San Francisco and he went up against Steve Young, was maybe one of the most hyped NFL games of all time. And he won. And it was incredible. And he still had, and I think you're right, Adam, he had that Montana magic still that season. Like if he hadn't gotten, if you don't remember, he had 2 comeback wins in those playoffs for the Chiefs against the Steelers and the Oilers. And the Oilers, he scored 28 points in the second half. It was vintage Joe Montana. Third play of the game in the AFC Championship game, he gets a concussion and he's out. Chiefs, what was it? 30,
Bruce Smith happens, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, Bruce, it was 30-13. Yeah.
That Oilers game is memorable because that's when Keith Cash spiked the football off Buddy Ryan's face after scoring a touchdown. But to piggyback on what you're saying about impact, I still remember the Kansas City Here I Come Sports Illustrated cover. As soon as that was announced, it was national news. Huge. It was the number one story in sports for some time, and it took Kansas City out of the wilderness and put them on the radar in a way they hadn't been since really 1970, the 60s, right?
My grandma knew no one in the NFL. She still knew Joe Montana. Like, I still remember she sent me Joe Montana, not once, but twice, Joe Montana ornaments. It was the exact same ornament. I think she forgot that she sent it one year, but that's how much she's like, yeah, I know Joe Montana. Like, again, the impact in Kansas City, while short, was so electric because it took Kansas City from a team with all the struggles to finally winning playoff games. And then when he was no longer in Kansas City, what happened? They weren't winning playoff games yet again. So you have to value that. And again, in my opinion, the value of the quarterback position, his impact on and off the field. And again, finally, not winning a Super Bowl, but taking the Chiefs over the boogeyman, which was winning a playoff game.
I love that Adam said we trekked through the deserts to get, it's like the dunes of Dave Craig, the Badlands of Bill Kenny, the sands of Steve DeBerg, whatever, right? Like to get there. I want to ask this because as we're talking about legacy, I'm thinking of 2012, which is the year before we arrive in the golden era where we're at today, right? A big part of the story of Clark Hunt's willingness to flush the commode of everything in Arrowhead after that year, part of it was Jovan Belcher, part of it Scott Pioli, part of it Romeo Crennel and Todd Haley and the failure of that stuff. But part of it was also this fan response, the Save Our Chiefs fandom, right? Paying to fly banners around Arrowhead, whatever. There's a part of me that wonders this. Is it possible that without Joe Montana showing us, hey, this franchise can be a national talking point? If it wasn't for like 2 years in which we're like, oh, this is what it's like, is it possible that we never see that fan level at Arrowhead demanding something better because we never really knew it? Like if the best you ever have is Dave Craig at 8-8, Steve DeBerg at 7-9, with some good linemen in front of them, right? If that's the best, then do you ever, let's say 2 decades later, ever have fans going, enough of this BS, like, give us something better? And then without that fan support, is there the tipping point to get to I'm not saying there's no Andy Reid and Mahomes and Super Bowls now, if not for Joe Montana, but everything affects everything else, right? And what does that mean for this?
And they may not have ever gotten Patrick Mahomes if Joe Montana had been able to, like, you want to go whole butterfly effect on it. If Joe Montana had been able to get it done, say he doesn't get that concussion and they beat the Bills and they go and they win the Super Bowl. Carl Peterson's strategy, and Carl deserves a lot of credit for like the Chiefs fan culture, the tailgating and the stuff like that he helped, bring to Kansas City. But he had a strategy that didn't work, right? It was I'm going to try to go all in. I'm going to get veterans, quarterbacks from San Francisco, and I'm going to install them. I'm not going to draft and develop my own guy. If Joe Montana wins that Super Bowl, plays one more season, they lose in the playoffs and he goes, Carl Peterson is the GM of the Kansas. He may get a lot more run than he ended up getting because he brought a title. It changes the organizational philosophy a little bit. We may not ever end up
a little bit. He
right.
went and chased 2 San Francisco quarterbacks after that. With Steve Bono,
right.
It was like, okay, this might work again. When it got to Elvis Gerbach, he kind of became a parody of himself, right?
Yeah, it wasn't going to work, right? But like, had it gone another way, we all would have been thrilled with that, but we may not have ever entered this era of Chiefs football. And have we seen other teams in the NFL try this? The Rams did it and they pulled it off, right? They went and got Matt Stafford. They managed to pull it off. But it's really, the Bucs did it. Obviously, they got Tom Brady. It worked for them. But
the Jets did it for 8 seconds, right?
Yeah, it works. It can work. But what you have with Patrick Mahomes, what New England had with Tom Brady, what the Steelers got with Big Ben, that's the preferable way to do it. It sets you up for a lot more winning and a lot more success.
Here's to Joe.
I want to ask you, do the Chiefs win the Super Bowl if Joe doesn't get a concussion in that game against the Bills? The Bills were really good.
Of course the Chiefs win. Of course the Chiefs win anytime I imagine any alternate reality.
They definitely had a shot.
I think so. I mean, the defense was really good. Joe was the X factor. Dave Craig came in and that was it. Like they couldn't score. And so you're going up against Bruce Smith and that Buffalo Bills defense and the offense that they had with Jim Kelly. Like
Thurman Thomas, Andre Reed, all those guys.
They were amazing. They were really amazing. They were fun to watch too.
You needed Joe. You needed Joe on the field, matriculating the ball, eating up clock, keeping those guys off the field. And you needed that magic. And when he went out of the game, they just didn't have it. But look, yeah, I agree. I mean, Joe Montana doesn't belong to the Chiefs in the way that he belongs to fans of the San Francisco 49ers. But like having a piece of that Hall of Fame, all-time great quarterback, having him have had a cup of coffee in Kansas City and he won games. That was pretty cool. I think he belongs on this list, and I think we've got him in around the right spot, considering we're talking about all-time greatest Chiefs. He's an all-time great. He is a great Chief, but he's on the back end when you talk all-time. Does anybody think he should be higher?
Adam did. Adam had him at 30.
Not higher than 30, but yeah. He's one of the 3 greatest quarterbacks in franchise history. So,
well, let's go from Joe Montana to somebody who did spend more than a cup of coffee with the Kansas City Chiefs, and that is another kicker on the list, Nick Lowery. I got to go back to Sterling for this one because Sterling, you and Nick are tight. Talk to us about Nick Lowery and what he means to Kansas City, and where'd you have him ranked on the list?
Yeah, 29th. I had him the highest. Again, I know Matt Connor, not a special teamer, so I'm sure we're going to have some fun with that. But he is one in the Chiefs Hall of Fame, spent 14 years here in Kansas City. When he retired, he, I think still is actually, the all-time Chiefs leading scorer. He helped usher in a new era of kicking. Jan Sinnerud, the Chiefs have been lucky with their kickers for the most part, right? For the most part. But they really had Jan Sinnerud, who ushered in a new era. Then Nick Lowery, who took over for Jan, ushered in the next era, which was a lot higher field goal percentages, and he was the king of the king. Like I believe when he retired as well, he was the all-time field goal percentage leader. Right? Like he is historically important at a position. Yes, it's not quarterback. Yes, it's not an edge rusher. I understand that. Yes, we're talking about special teams and we're talking about kickers. But when it comes down to it, he was the best of the best. He's still around. He's still very integrated in Chiefs Kingdom, right? He's out there all the time. Very good dude, but 14 years with Kansas City and the numbers that he put up. Again, Matt Connor, you and I are going to disagree about positional value here, but the fact of the matter is when you spend 14 years and you have the accolades that he has, he deserves to be relatively high on this list. Again, 2-time All-Pro, 3-time Pro Bowler, NFL scoring leader, Chiefs Hall of Fame. And again, 80% career field goal make rate, which at that time was absurd. 80% right now, I get that might get you canned. 80% back then was tops of the tops.
Big leg too. And they would try those long field goals, especially with Marty. right? Because, they were plodding along trying to score 13 points a game. So they would take those big shots. I want to go to Adam next, only because Matt Connor hates kickers and doesn't have Lowery on the list at all. Adam, you and you guys are basically responsible. I had him at 47. You had him at 37. Talk to me about your positioning of Nick Lowery here.
Yeah, the longevity as Sterling hit, but also all-time leading scorer. I think he hit this too. 1,466 points. That has to count. You're in Kansas City for that long. You make that kind of impact. That has to count. 2-time first-team All-Pro, 3-time Pro Bowler. This hasn't been mentioned yet. NFL Man of the Year in 1993. That makes the Chiefs look great. Not too many Chiefs have accomplished that. So I just thought he was a fixture during a somewhat tough time. And I also like the adversity. Sterling, you might know his story better than I do, but he was not in the league in 1979 after initially being with the Patriots in 1978. So he really came back with a vengeance and found a home in Kansas City, and the Chiefs were thankful for it.
Matt Connor, how much does, and I know you didn't have him on the list, but how much does staying involved in the Kansas City fandom matter to you when you're thinking about all-time great Chiefs? Some guys, they come, they leave, that's it. Nick Lowery is a guy who's been around town, continued to do philanthropy, work in the community, be in the community. Does that matter to you?
Sure. If you're having to decide between guys, then of course, like being a great civic person, being the kind of guy you want around, investing locally. I think that's all great, but those are all like superficial to our list, or maybe superfluous is what I should say, to our list, which is who are the best Chiefs players. We're not saying the best Chiefs civic engagers or the best Chiefs community organizers or the best Chiefs philanthropists, right? I mean, like, I'm not throwing Casey Wolf on my list because he visits elementary schools for reading drives. I'm not giving Nick Lowery more points than he already because he already scored so many. He doesn't need my points. Nick Lowery doesn't care how many points I give him, and so I gave him no points. He already has too many. That's why I didn't do it. No, look, man, I didn't even say a word, and like my name was already mentioned 5 times before I ever said a word about Nick Lowery. So maybe I've already overstated my point in other episodes about other specialists. I don't need to make the same arguments here, except just to say, hey, you can be really, really great at your job. And the fact of the matter is, to me, what is your job is the most important question to then ask. And then I say, and then how good were you at it? And so if you say, what is your job, specialist, you're automatically off my list because I just have room for 1, maybe 2 on a list as short as 50. If you make the list 60, 75, absolutely we're going to begin to bring in other guys on board. So it's not a knock on Nick Lowery. It's not a knock on Harrison Butker, for that matter, or other people who I think Dustin Colquitt could have been on the list. For me, I just don't have it there. So I'm hoping that Nick Lowery doesn't scroll to see where his name's at, and then he's like, who is that rat bastard who doesn't value the all-time leading scorer? It's not that. But, again, what is your job? And then, yeah. So that's as good as I've got. I don't know how else to put it.
Nick Lowery only missed, I think, 6 extra points in his career, which I know it was a chip shot back then, but he kicked a lot of extra points. Pretty incredible. Big leg, longtime Chief, checks in there for us. And so we got to go back to Matt Connor, because now we're on to the Nigerian Nightmare here at number 38. Matt Connor's, I believe, favorite Chief of all time, Christian Okoye.
Look, man. Look, Christian, dear Mr. Okoye, I'm sorry that I did not put you number 1, and that this sorry group of 4 is also not recognizing the same. I was drunk when I made my list. I first saw you when I was 10. You are the perfect blend of size and speed. You are the Nigerian Nightmare, bowled over this 10-year-old kid who was surfing channels one day and wondered how the holy hell someone that big could also be so damn good. I don't think I used such profanities when I was a kid. Otherwise, my mom would have sent me away from the television, which was not where I wanted to be. How do you not love him? I love everything about Christian Okoye. I love his accent. I love his story to the NFL. I love his production. When Barry Word was fighting for some of his yardage, like Christian Okoye gets injured, Barry Word comes in, gets 1,000-yard season. I hated Barry Word so much, he might as well have been a member of the Denver Broncos, because I was worried that he was going to take away Christian Okoye's, like for a while they were this tandem. And I was like, hell no, there's room here for one big burly beast in the backfield. And I want it to be Christian Okoye. He's just one of those guys that's like, he's the ultimate for me. If you saw him, you knew, like, to me, it was like Jamal Charles. Jamal Charles is the exact same way. You could look at the stats of Jamal Charles and go like, wow, that must have been an elusive back. He averaged a ton of yards per carry, things like that. But when you saw him, you're like, nothing else like him. And to me, and especially because I was a kid at the time, I think, and you're like, like when you're 10, you're like, what's cool is like trucks, like big things that make noise and do big
Bigfoot,
stuff.
right?
Yeah.
He looked like a superhero.
He was, man. He was. So he was the first athlete I ever like worshipped or put that kind of like larger than life, you know what I'm saying, right? Like that, he held that kind of place for me. So he is the reason I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan. He is the reason. So he's got the stats. You guys can quote him. He unfortunate injuries. He should have been an all-timer on paper. He's not on paper. I had to rank him where I did because I have to be a little bit realistic. But I love you, Christian Okoye. I love you. That's all. I leave my wife. I mean, not in a weird way. Now I'm getting.
Yeah, it's getting weird.
I love him. I'm sorry.
So I had him 36th on the list.
Yeah. Funny enough, he threw us all under the bus, but both Adam and Sterling had the Nigerian Nightmare ranked higher than Matt Connor. Let's work our way back around and go to Adam this time. Adam, you had him at 33, again the highest of all of us. Talk us through the thinking there.
I had the pleasure of watching him play in Arrowhead as a child, and really, he's the first player I remember seeing live as a Chiefs fan. And what Matt was saying, that had to be their thing, very much true. Kansas City Chiefs fans, Chiefs Kingdom, they sort of have an outsized obsession with running backs. I think that starts with Christian Okoye. Now, of course, other players have contributed to that. Marcus and Priest and Jamal and Larry and now Isaiah Pacheco. But I don't know if Isaiah Pacheco was like the fifth most popular Chief, despite being, I love Isaiah Pacheco, but he's not even probably in the top 10 best Chiefs. But he is very, very, very popular because Kansas City loves them a running back. And I think this starts here.
And it's the way he runs, right? It's not just that Isaiah Pacheco is the starting running back for the Kansas City Chiefs. What makes him, different than the guys that have preceded him at that position? And why do people love Jerick McKinnon? Because he blocks, right? They love Isaiah Pacheco because he puts his head down and runs like a hammer. They loved the Nigerian Nightmare for the same reason. Sterling, talk us through your ranking of 36.
Yeah, I'm at 36. This is really hard for me because this was before I was born. I was born in 94. He retired in 92. So I never had a chance to watch him play in person. Obviously, I've seen all the highlights, watch all the NFL Classic games, all that stuff. It's interesting because he averaged 3.9 yards a carry. He had 2 seasons over 1,000 yards. He played in only 79 games, 6 years in Kansas City. Obviously, injuries played a massive factor in that. I know Matt Connor's scowling at me, but numbers are numbers, man. The reason why I actually had him higher than you, Matt Connor, though, was because of the legacy. Because of the fact, you're right, he was the start of the long line of phenomenal Chiefs running backs. He was the start of this affinity that all Chiefs fans have of the running back position. It all gets traced back to Christian Okoye.
Patient zero, baby.
It's just interesting that we have this sort of fascination with a guy who, quite frankly, was not the most effective, but it was the running style. It was the uniqueness. It was that this is something that we haven't really seen before. It was the ability to always pick up these short yards. It was like the Jackie Battle. Again, not comparing necessarily Jackie Battle and Christian Okoye, but if you needed 2 yards, Jackie Battle gets you 3. If you needed 4 yards, he's getting you 3. But with Christian Okoye, if you needed a yard, 2 or 3, didn't matter. He was going to pick it up. The issue was he wasn't going to get you a lot of 9, 10, 11-yard runs either. It's just such a weird back and forth with Okoye where we picture him as this almost Hall of Fame style, but it was cut short. But then you look back and you're like, he wasn't the most efficient guy. It was just the most fun guy we've probably ever had as a Chiefs running back.
There's a little bit of a Bo Jackson thing going on, I think. The way we remember him is more than what he was on the field. And I'll tell you why that is. Think about Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry weighs 247 pounds and runs a 4.54 40. Christian Okoye weighs 260 pounds and runs a 4.45. He's bigger and he's faster than Derrick freaking Henry. That's why we've built him up to this running back guy. You know what I mean? This superhero, as Patrick said.
260.
What if he ran like he was running against NFL defenses that were built so much differently than what Derrick Henry is running against now, right? Christian Okoye would rip through NFL defenses today with everybody spread out the way that they are with smaller guys on the field. You've got smaller, more athletic linemen. He would have absolutely wrecked some of these defensive lines. You put him on the field with Mahomes, forget it.
He had no quarterback.
Yeah. Hey, I'll just add, here's why Okoye has the mystique. Because back in those days, what you loved about football was the smash mouth, hard hitting, like the NFL was a very physical, brutal product, and it was celebrated that way. It's like the glory days of boxing because we had like Tyson, and it was like everything hard hitting in those days was like what everyone wanted to watch, and except all the hard hitting was on the defensive side. It was like the Atwaters and the Romanowskis and the Mecklenburgs and the whatever in the division. And then the Chiefs have a guy named Tony Richardson who would deliver the first hit. And then Christian Okoye is so big that when he's getting into the second and third, forget it. Suddenly the Chiefs are going from an offensive side, delivering the same big hits that everyone's used to seeing on the defensive side. And so in a league where you're celebrating like big, bad brutes, and normally it's like these stout defenses that would like try to stop the Montanas and the whatever, then here comes Christian Okoye going, hey, how about a battering ram on this side of the football? And everyone was like, holy hell, what is this import? And Kansas City fell in love.
How do you rank a folk hero rationally? I couldn't do it. I think I probably failed here, but the memory of him is so great that I just was ecstatic and got him all the way up to 33, I guess.
That's what I love about this exercise is that there's not really, with the exception of number one, there's no right answers, right? And so it's your 50 greatest Chiefs for your reasons and the criteria that you determine in making your list, which is what I think makes it so eclectic and fun. All right. When you think about great Chiefs linebackers, with the names that pop into your head, Willie Lanier, Bobby Bell, but there was another guy who was absolutely fantastic. And that, of course, is Jim Lynch. He comes in here at number 37 for us, edging out the Nigerian Nightmare. But this is a Super Bowl champion, an AFL champion, a 2-time second-team All-Pro, an NFL All-Star. He's in the Chiefs Hall of Fame. Let's go work. We haven't started with Adam yet, so let's start with Adam. Talk us a little bit through your ranking of Jim Lynch, who we all were really close together on this one. You had him at 38.
Yeah, very good player. He actually won the Maxwell Award, which is given to the best collegiate player. So really an acclaimed player coming out of Notre Dame. The way I'd summarize Jim Lynch and the way he's remembered, it's hard to be George Harrison next to Paul McCartney and John Lennon. It's really, really hard. And we all know George Harrison, phenomenal musician in his own right, could have been a leading man, front man for almost any band, but he wasn't. So when you're playing next to two Hall of Famers in Lanier and Bell, it's just tough. And also, it's really hard to say how much that helped him. I hate to kind of like knock him on that, but when you're playing with that level of talent, and also let's not forget that Buck Buchanan was in front of him. So it's sort of hard to evaluate him versus another guy that's coming up on our list. I won't spoil it, who was kind of in a wasteland in terms of defensive talent around him. So it's really hard to be objective with all these variables. But he was one of the better players on a Super Bowl champion team, so he has to make the list, right?
I'm at 38, and I think the comp is, what if Willie Gay Jr. ever lived up to the potential and stayed in Kansas City for 11 years? Because he's his all-around player. 18 sacks, 17 interceptions. He was the chess piece, if you will, alongside, Bell and Lanier. And you obviously mentioned Buchanan up front, but I think George Harrison was the absolute perfect comparison for him. Because you're right, we might not know, but we all understand if he was in his own band, he's the star. But he wasn't. So that's why he's down here, at least on my list. He's clocked in at 38. And again, it's not like we ever had the absolute pleasure of watching him play, but he was on the unit that really brought Kansas City that initial championship. We always remember the defense and specifically the linebackers, right? I feel like that's the spot where we remember the most fondly. He was a integral part of that. And so for that reason, here's where he is.
Yeah, Matt Connor. I mean, you hear these old timers talk about that team. They talk like the first thing they talk about is the linebacker play.
Think about how much you loved watching the defense this year and the second level, right? Like how fun it was to watch Chenal grow into especially in the postseason, being such a tremendous force downhill. You talk about Drew Tranquil and the addition of what he brought, Nick Bolton, of course, Willie Gay Jr., like how deep and talented that was. And yet they've got nothing on what the linebackers of this team brought. Like how much fun we had this year. I'm just thinking, how much fun was it? Those guys were together 8 total seasons, right? So you have Bobby Bell already in place in 63. And then 4 years later, within 3 draft choices, the Chiefs go, hey, we'll take Jim Lynch. And then 3 picks later, we'll take Willie Lanier. And then suddenly you're lining up Hall of Famer, Chiefs Hall of Famer. And the weakest of the 3 is what Adam said, the Maxwell Award winner. That goes to any position. It's not like he won the nation's best linebacker. He won the nation's best collegiate player either side of the football. So, one, what a great draft masterstroke. That's hell of a second round haul right there. And yeah, you install that into your defense for nearly a decade. It provided great dividends. It would have been fun, I'm sure, to have like live memories of watching those guys play at Arrowhead. And, he's a Chiefs Ring of Honor member.
Can you even assemble a linebacking core like that in the 2020s?
I don't think so. I mean, the game has obviously changed and
salary cap and everything.
Yeah. But yeah, that's it. I mean, is this the best linebacking core in NFL history?
It's on the list.
You've got an argument, to be sure. I mean, you can score on these guys in the Super Bowl. It's really incredible. All right, we've been talking a lot about hard-nosed football players in this with the linebackers, Christian Okoye. We got one more, one of the hardest-nosed football players ever to come through Kansas City, Tony Richardson. 2 fullbacks in this section of the list. Let's go to Sterling for this one. Talk us through the great T-Rich in this one, who you had ranked at, let's see here, 38. No, sorry, 34.
34, yeah. I loved Tony Richardson. I love T-Rich. It's funny, as a kid, you don't normally get enamored with fullbacks, yet somehow I did. I, as a 7, 8, 9-year-old, was like, no, I understand the importance of what he's doing right now, guys. He's blocking. He's setting the lanes up for Priest Holmes and all these great running backs to burst through. But he was also a very good pass catcher, averaged 4 yards a carry. He was the prototypical fullback in the NFL. Like when you look at fullbacks, like, no, I want Tony Richardson, an all-around phenomenal player, undrafted guy, got picked up by the Cowboys, then signed with Kansas City, played in 1 game in 1995, and then, came back to block for Marcus Allen. I loved Tony Richardson growing up. And again, this might be my Christian Okoye for you guys. That's my T-Rich. I was so saddened when he went to the Vikings and then the Jets. I'm like, no, that's our guy. Don't wear green. Wear red, Tony. Come on back. But Chiefs Hall of Famer, was it Man of the Year as well? Yeah, T-Rich, here's to you, man. I've always been a massive fan.
Yeah, 3-time Pro Bowler, 2-time second team All-Pro, and the All-Decades team for the 2000s. Adam Best, you had him the lowest, I believe, of all of us on the list here at 46. So just sneaking into your top 50. What was the reason for that? Is it because he put up a ton of stats?
I think it's just positional value. The fullback position is really hard to kind of evaluate when it barely even exists in the modern day game. But I'm also a big fan of T. Rich. He blocked for 1K yard rushers 9 consecutive seasons. Who does that? So quite the run. He also led the Chiefs in 2000. We've had a lot of great players in the history of this illustrious franchise. So this is not an easy exercise. And I'm looking at that 46 and thinking, gosh, I should have had him higher. But then you look at the people above him and how. But fond memories of Tony Rich, definitely a fan favorite for the hard-nosed style of football that Matt spoke about earlier. That was kind of the hallmark of Marty Ball.
I had him at 37. I believe you, Matt Connor, had him the highest at 35 for us. Talk me through your T. Rich memories.
Yeah, for me, here's what he goes to the Jets in the twilight of his career. He turns 40 years old during his final season. He turned 40 on the field. He played all 16 games in 2010, his final season, played 234 overall. I already loved Tony Richardson. I already had a lot of memories of him, obviously. Block everything that you guys have already said. But then when I think about the physical nature of his play, the fact that he was becoming a dinosaur even during his career, that the game was changing while he was still offering up the same old physical style of football. He was so good at it that he maintained relevance to play in every game for some team, even though much of the league had moved on from the position. And then he turns 40 while on the field. He played that physical and yet was still that reliable and that good to be relevant to the NFL in 2010 for 16 games. When I saw that, I just thought, I've got to put the guy higher than maybe I would, just thinking, oh, he's a fullback and maybe the stats aren't X, Y, or Z. In a physical sport where they say the best ability is availability, I don't know what to do with a guy like Tony Richardson was a one of a kind.
I know, again, we're talking Chiefs, but you're right. He did that for an 11-5 Jets team where Mark Sanchez was the quarterback. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that was the year they actually went pretty deep in the playoffs, right, with Rex Ryan.
Was that the butt fumble year?
That may be that. But again, how crazy is that Mark Sanchez, an 11-5 team in a fullback, is still playing in every single game?
Yeah.
Wild.
And, we've mentioned stats a few times because as a fullback and the way that teams used fullback during the era that Tony played, he didn't get the ball very much. Except one day in the year 2000, in the 15th game of the season, he got to be the featured back for the Kansas City Chiefs against the hated rival Denver Broncos. And what did he do? 23 carries, 156 yards, and a touchdown. How awesome was that to see? And how wonderful must that have been for Tony Richardson, who spent his career paving the way to glory for other guys to have that moment.
There's just no one like him that I can remember. And so, it was a real pleasure to watch him with the Chiefs. That longevity is just, it's really something.
I mean, those of us who are 40 here or older know that at that age, getting on a Frisbee golf field is amazing. being an effing fullback, the position that encourages the most contact in like the history of football, he's just built different. He's built different.
He was also, he's a charitable guy as well. You mentioned the Man of the Year award. He runs the punt, pass, and kick with Special Olympics, which is a big partner of ours here at Fansided. And he was on the NFLPA executive committee for a 2-year term as well. So Renaissance man, to be sure. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. That was the 50 greatest Chiefs of all time, 40 through 36. Please join us next time as we tackle the next 5 guys on our list.